getting demand from their students to increase these design build opportunities. And then, I think that for certain individuals, they're drawn to that because they want to be more effective as architects. And I think if you pay attention, you understand that some of the most effective architects are the ones that understand building construction and building science.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk Podcast, a regular discussion with building industry professionals. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by architects Lindsay Love and Lindsay Schack of Love Shack Architecture. You can find the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk Podcast and the original Fine Homebuilding Podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can leave feedback and ask questions there too. It is a pleasure to have you both on the show. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks,
Can
Patrick.
you both tell me where your offices are? You have more than one, right?
Yes, we have a handful of offices if you include all of our remote employees. Officially, we have offices in Bozeman, the town of Jackson, and the city of Driggs.
And so tell me, how did you both come to live in the amazing places where you live? In a previous conversation, Lindsay Schack told me that it definitely influences your work as architects. Lindsay Schack, can you talk about that? And then Lindsay Love, I'm going to ask you the same question. How'd you get to Jackson, Wyoming, Lindsay?
I was born in Jackson, and I've just always really been kind of attached to this landscape here. Having the national parks in my backyard is pretty special.
And have you lived other places? Then you came back?
I lived in Walla Walla, Washington for a couple years in the rolling fields there. That was really beautiful. But then I went to architecture school in Bozeman, where I met Lindsay Schack. And I had the opportunity to complete my architectural apprenticeship in Santa Fe.
And Lindsay Schack, how did you end up in Wyoming?
I live in Montana. Our office is in Bozeman, and having gone to architecture school in Bozeman at MSU, that's where Lindsay Love and I met as students. I had previously been living in Missoula, Montana, studying a different discipline, kind of started over in architecture. And before that, I was just an Eastern Montana kid. I lived in like the nearly North Dakota part, affectionately termed Western Dakota, and loved the western side of the state. It's a really diverse state in terms of its landscape, and really loved Western Montana, wanted to stay there. And so when I decided to go back to architecture school, I honestly didn't think about going anywhere else. It was just a means to an end to get through the process and be able to do the work. I wasn't worried too much about pedigree from various universities. So always have kind of been in Montana, decided to stay in Montana after school. It was a little bit of a hard choice to make. I really did want to go. And so the compromise was to travel and then stay and work and try to build a community in Montana.
And how does the beautiful landscape of where you both live affect your work as architects?
I would say we're both really inspired by it. But it's also, I think we feel a great responsibility to be stewards of our natural resources here. And as well, the views and the character of the place.
Is it a challenge to have architecture that lives up to the beautiful landscape around your projects? I'm sure it makes you want to do a good job. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, Lindsay Schack, do you want to take that?
Yeah, totally. I think for us, we see ourselves as stewards of resources, the client's resources, but there's a community resource for every building that gets built too, whether it's way out on private property or it's within a neighborhood. It's really hard to compete with landscape like this in terms of your building or your architecture being like an object in the field. So we want to make, if there's going to be a building, we want it to be one that enhances the area that it's in and utilizes the resources that it can and doesn't try too hard to compete with it. And I guess that relates to our design being what some might call, modest or humble, but we believe it's operating with restraint.
Absolutely. I think that's kind of a principle that I learned from Lindsay Schack in her design. And we do, fortunately, most of our clients are on the same plane with us in terms of they're moving here to enjoy the landscape. And yes, they want nice views of their landscape, but they also don't they don't need their building or their home to compete with it. So we try to design in a way that, like Lindsay Schack mentioned, is with restraint and that sort of blends in or enhances what's surrounding it.
Uh, so how did you both become architects? Were there building and hands-on stuff that as kids you were exposed to? Were there people in your life who influenced your careers as architects?
I'll hop on that one first. As a kid, I think I just really loved building forts, basically. And I think we all kind of have some of that in us. Um, and of course, as a kid, was building with whatever I could find. And then, of course, in architecture, we are not building forts and we are not building with whatever we can find out in the field. But I think that for me, there's this great connection of natural materials and materials that do come from near the place where the building is being built. Um, that that connection is really strong for me, and I found a lot of empowerment in that through the practice of architecture.
How about you, Lindsay Schack? Did you like building stuff as a kid? Did you have folks who might have influenced you to become an architect?
Definitely. I definitely was the kid that was, organizing floor plans on the playground in the rocks of the playground, or I was, drawing things that we had seen on family trips. And I didn't grow up with anybody in my community being an architect. Growing up in Eastern Montana and with other family in Western North Dakota, there's not a lot of architects out there. It's not really a culture that exists or is strong in that out there. The residential home market has grown a lot since, but when I was a kid, it was sort of like being on the farm and everyone went to their jobs and there wasn't a lot of architects walking around. And so it wasn't, my parents weren't super excited when I said that I wanted to do this. They sort of were, I think, intimidated by their view of plumbing and concrete and electricians and being a female too. They wanted like, oh, you should do interior design. You're great at drawing and all those things. And so I think maybe just to spite them, I went to architecture school anyway, right? And it ended up being fine. But I think that there was really no context for me to want to do this. And it took a lot, I think it took a lot of courage for me anyway to step into the space and say I wanted to do it. And really happy that I did, because the work that we're doing right now is really fulfilling.
Mhm. As I understand it, you guys came together to start your own firm based on an understanding that your skills would complement each other. How has that worked out? And what are some of the things that you like or are glad the other Lindsay has interest or experience with? Lindsay Love, why don't you go first?
Yeah, Lindsay Schack and I definitely have skills and characteristics that complement one another. Sometimes we find ourselves butting heads, but ultimately, we know through our years of working together that any project or task comes out better for both of us being part of it. Um, Lindsay Schack is, if it's fair to say, more of a big picture thinker and kind of a dreamer and a risk taker than I am. Um, I find myself, we joke about it that I'm kind of caught in the weeds sometimes, but the upside of that is that I can balance the dreaminess or the big picture by really figuring out how to achieve it and figuring out the nuts and bolts of how to make something happen.
Yeah, we totally, I think, kind of fill each other's gaps in a lot of ways or take over roles that, that the other one is maybe less inclined to jump on. And I think that's been really beneficial. I love working with Lindsay Love partially because she doesn't hesitate to speak her mind or disagree. And I think that's what makes a really good business partner is somebody that will kind of peel back the layers of whatever you're thinking about and help you come up with the right questions to come up with the right solutions. And that's something that she's really skilled at. And she's very detail oriented where I'll get super excited about a shiny new thing and she'll kind of help ground me to figure out how we could actually execute. And then likewise, if she's mired in the details, I can help her see the bigger strategy and ultimately we found that, like Lindsay said, when we work on things together, we have better results. And we've brought that culture of, I think, being different from each other but aligned into the rest of our studio, where we encourage ideas to come from any member of the team. We are humble in our approach of like, well, maybe this person knows more than me. What do they think about it? And that's a culture we brought into our whole team, just because we know that we've had to learn so much from each other, and it's resulted in these great outcomes.
So how do you handle clients? Do you have are you matched to a client, or do you work as a team to handle a project for one of your clients?
It depends on the project.
It depends.
Go ahead, Lindsay. Go for it.
I'll jump in. So we started out as a remote company in 2015. So we've always been serving clients over Zoom, over GoToMeeting, over whatever the platform is. And this was way pre-pandemic, but we've realized that there was an intense market, a very needy market of people that wanted to build in places that they didn't currently reside. And most of our clients in the beginning did come from Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, but a lot of the clients that we started to attract were relocating, or it was a second home for them, or an income property, an investment property. And so we developed a system for working with them remotely. And then in the beginning, we always teamed up together. Now we've grown to an office of about 8, and so there's more smaller teams that we build with each of us as a captain or a principal, with another project architect and another support person. And it all kind of mixes. Some of our projects we've got, the full team on. Other projects we have 2 of us, and we kind of take it case by case and region by region. We don't necessarily like just divide up by geography, for example.
Lindsay Love, can you please talk about the kinds of projects you like? I learned that the 2 of you have to build in climate zone 7, which is about as cold as it gets in the continental U.S. Can you talk about what it's like to work in these cold places and the kind of projects that are resulting from the climate you build in?
Yes. So Jackson is the specific climate zone 7 where we do work in, and there are all sorts of challenges with that. But I think it's been a little bit thrilling to have the opportunity to kind of figure out some experimental. I don't want to say that they're experimental because they have been done before, but maybe in a different design configuration, or just with a little tweak to it. And nobody's necessarily done it in this place, like maybe Minnesota, maybe Alaska. But that's really fun to be on the forefront of figuring out how to build a super high performance building in one of the most challenging places, and do it without any high carbon materials. So we really try to stick to foam free assemblies and limit the amount of steel or other metal components of the building. So for instance, we had the opportunity to design a project in Wilson for a client who was really interested in a wood building. And so we chose CLT, or mass timber, for the wall assembly, and a wood fiberboard for the majority of the exterior insulation. As far as we know, no one's done that in this region. So we had to really figure it out, from making sure that the county officials were going to allow it and not have any problems with it, what information they might need about it. We collected that from the product suppliers and had some conversations with them early on. Some challenges with fastening a lot of exterior insulation and working with our structural engineer through that. And then attaching the cladding system. Contractors in this area are not always familiar with, say, rain screens, or honestly exterior insulation at all. So we had a really great contractor who was very open-minded, and so we working through all of that was relatively easy. But those were some of the things we had to work through.
Lindsay
Um,
Schack, would
yeah.
you say that uh, high performance housing is an emphasis of the practice? Do you have clients who say, "Oh no, I just want to build a normal house," and how do you respond to that if they just say, "Oh no, it just has to be an average house. Let's not go crazy."
Well, I feel like we've reached the fortunate position where we don't take those clients. So if the clients are really interested in, say, a code level only single family home, and let's say the goals for the project are aesthetics and, being super proud of your place when you have a barbecue, those are, if that's the limit of the goal for the project, then we usually talk ourselves out of those projects. We're attracting clients that have performance goals for their house, and that doesn't mean it has to go full carbon neutral, full passive house, whatever. It just means that they want to think intentionally about the materials they choose. They want to optimize systems so that we can reduce energy use and increase comfort and increase resiliency. And if like they don't get excited at all about that, if that is like totally boring and we don't care, then we kind of screen for that and just explain that that's where our skill set really lies in bringing that forward. And so we seem to attract clients that have an affinity for building science. And it was funny in the beginning, it seemed like we were always being hired by engineers to design their homes, or like athletes, or like people that had like a desire to nerd out about performance. And if it was just purely an aesthetic exercise, we usually that the phone didn't ring from those folks for us, right? Like we want more. We want our spaces to be beautiful, but we want them to function really, really well, or it's not good enough for us. And so those kind of simple, like just want to hit the code and get inside my house and not think about it anymore is really not our market.
Hmm. Lindsay Love, I learned that you built your own straw bale house. Can you please talk about the house and tell me how you decided on straw bales as a means of construction?
Absolutely. Um, so building my own house, I had built or worked on a crew building a number of other types of with a number of other types of construction materials, from Faswall, which was called Durasol back then, to regular stud frame. I'd done a lot of renovation work. I had some Adobe preservation experience. I worked on a couple of straw bale buildings prior, and then I helped manage and teach a light straw clay building as well. And so, just from all of those experiences, I guess, in building my own home, it was sort of like an opportunity to demonstrate my skills within my community, as well as just to provide myself with some housing security. Um, Straw bale literally seemed like the sort of like the most bang for the buck, the most efficient system to use. Um, a lot less labor than like light straw clay. High R value. I got to use incredible plasters. I actually made my own plaster from clay that I got 8 miles away. I had some of the wood milled from a local mill. Um, and it's not a fully straw bale house. It is actually a hybrid of a double stud wall and straw bale. So it was kind of like blending a modern high performance conventional system with a modern high performance alternative system, and just demonstrating that I understand both and can choose to use the tools in the right application.
Did code enforcement, your building inspector, was he or she on board with the straw bale construction? Had they even been exposed to it?
They had actually, Teton Valley was kind of a hub for straw bale and alternative building. Not as much as like Vermont, for example, but there were a handful of straw bale buildings already, and they didn't really blink. It
Hmm.
was not an issue whatsoever.
That's interesting to me.
Yeah.
Lindsay Schack, you also recently built a house, well, rehabbed one. Can you please talk about your house and what you and your husband did to it?
Sure. We bought a house in Manhattan, Montana that was built in 1889, which is pretty old for the West. And we bought it in a state of disrepair, like it wasn't livable when we bought it. And so we spent about a year doing that work when our kids were really young. And we did what a lot of, I think, couples at that stage in their life do. We moved in a little too soon. Things weren't really done. You're kind of living in a job site, but got to really treat my home as my own laboratory. Learned a lot about just sequencing and being your own GC. We did a lot of the work ourselves. We subcontracted some of it. My husband, being a professional, he could do a lot of that, and he's pretty skilled. And we had a
We should
lot of
say your
historic
husband was a
restoration to do
carpenter
in
and now
house.
runs a cabinet shop, right?
And right, right, in a millwork, yep. So finding somebody to make cut with custom knives the trim we needed. I knew a guy. So that really, made things easier from the standpoint of our home, and we're super proud of it. And it's a great family home. And it was just ironic that right about the time we finished this renovation was around when Lindsay and I reconnected, and I was starting to learn about passive house. And so there's a lot of the methodology of retrofits that I understand now that I think I would have done differently in my own home. But the work was already done and the money was already spent. So we all have to learn from sort of our own experiences of trial and error. And I find it fascinating how much we're still learning every day, because when I was in, both Lindsay and I have job site experience, and I worked for a framer in the summer when I was in college and architecture school. And it was tremendously educational to be the female architecture student on the job site and being humbled every day and needing to show up knowing that I'm the person on the job site that knows absolutely the least, and I'm there to learn. And it was great perspective. And so it's always given me a lot of respect for builders that I work with, for the work that my husband does. And one of the things I think Lindsay and I really aligned on is then, we want to be the architects that understand the perspective of the builder. And we want to understand what it's like to interpret drawings and then try to install and fabricate and make it happen in real life. Their job is really, really hard. And so we try to do our jobs in a way that eases that a little bit. But both of our building experience, I guess, of being on the other side of the process has really helped, I think, enhance what we do as architects.
Lindsay Love, what was your job site experience? Lindsay Schack said she worked as a framer during architecture school. Did you have similar experience?
Yep. My first construction experience was a design build program at MSU, at Montana State University. And I really got to experience all parts of building a building from there we didn't pour the foundation, but we did pour the slab. We installed the radiant heating, we framed, insulated, finished pretty much all of it. And then I worked for an architect and fabricator for a bit, and I learned a little bit about welding there. Then I worked for a sustainable builder in Bozeman, and I was kind of the cleanup crew partly, but also had some opportunity to do some framing and just, I think, being on site, being exposed to things. I also got to do some demonstration there and help tear things apart. I then took a break while I completed my architectural apprenticeship. And as I said, I did some Adobe preservation work during that time period. But then on my first straw bale project, I didn't help build the building from the ground up. There was a foundation and a roof, but we started with an earthen slab, stacking bales, interior framing, installing electrical wire on my second, and then a lot of plastering in that project and finishing.
Lindsay Schack, do you think you get more credibility from builders when they learn or that you can demonstrate the knowledge of building houses to them? Do you think that helps you in your work?
Definitely. I guess we try to think through, the sequencing of how it goes together. We're thinking through, the sourcing of the material, and then ultimately we're engaging the contractor as we're detailing to get their eyes on it. And the process of getting good feedback from a contractor has everything to do with getting their brain into what you're drawing. And that can actually be kind of challenging given everything else that a contractor is trying to manage when they're not yet on the job site. This is in the design phase. But we really value that time. and we find that, okay, now understanding the challenges that the contractor faces on the job site, it does impact how we detail our drawings, and how we organize sheets, and whether or not we can get things on the drawings as opposed to in a project manual that's in another spot on the job site. And it's like little things where we'll italicize or bold particular items in a detail to make sure that the, say, passive house or performance specific elements of that detail are noticed. Because there's the thing with high performance design is not that it's so challenging and rocket science, it has to be done in a very specific way. And so if we can get the contractor to be open-minded enough to understand that if they follow this sequence, that it'll end up in this result, then everybody ends up hitting the goal that we've set out to meet. And I think our drawings have a lot to do with that in communicating that path.
I'll ask Lindsay Love first, and I'll ask you, Lindsay Schack, in a little bit here. Do you think architecture school did a good job preparing you to be an architect, Lindsay Love?
In some ways, in the biggest sense, I think yes. I think we learned in architecture school to be humble and teachable, and we would get sort of ripped apart on our designs in a regular on at regular intervals. So in that way, I think it prepared us, and I think it also helped us to learn to think big picture, and then to think very much through the design of a building, which ultimately the nuts and bolts of how the building went together doesn't have nearly the impact as the entire building as a whole in the landscape and the way that affects your lifestyle living in it. So, yes, and there are ways that I think it could have helped prepare us better, or that site construction experience that both Lindsay Schack and I helped. I think that helped fill the gaps.
What do you think they should be doing better, Lindsay Love,
Mhm.
in architecture school?
I just think that I really think that every architecture student needs to be on a job site. There are so many things within the construction industry that sort of set architects up, not for failure, but for a challenge ahead that may not necessarily need to be there if we just spend some time on building sites mandatorily to begin with.
Is it a
Um,
matter of being able to talk to the people you're working with, or having a greater understanding of their challenges? What is the benefit of being on a job site for an architecture student?
Absolutely, being able to empathize with the people on the job site is part of it. Um, Drawing details that have some sensibility to them about how the thing can get put together. Uh, Being able to think through and realize that you need to think through the sequencing of how things go together. Um, those just make the process of building a building so much easier from the get-go if those are thought through while you're putting it on paper.
What do you think, Lindsay Schack? Did architecture school do a good job for you, getting you ready to be an architect?
Yeah, I think so. And I think Lindsay's being really diplomatic. I think that architecture school didn't really teach us to be humble. I think it taught us to, you know, that we should strive to be, glamorous architects with fancy name firms all over the world. And that was sort of the goal for everybody. And it's kind of hilarious, I think, coming from Montana State, which was a really strong design program, but not one that I think people across the country would know a lot about. It attracts fantastic professors and really talented students, and it's a great program. But I agree with Lindsay Love. I think getting students on the job site is something that the students are hungry for, and the school is doing more and more of as design build programs grow, and summer programs grow where they can get some hands-on experience. And I know that I coach my interns or the students that I work with, especially when they're early in architecture school, to go out and work for a construction company for a couple of summers, because you have the rest of your life to work in an office and sit in a chair and draft. And having that perspective of what it's like for the person that receives your drawings and has to execute them, is super, super beneficial. And as just as Lindsay said, like, it gives you empathy for what that job is. And then it further impacts you, that's why we have to really think through what we're doing. And we can't just blow it off and say the contractor has to figure it out in the field. That's just not acceptable. So I think schools are trying to do that. And I also think that the schools are catching up on the demand for building science education. The building science education, I think, could be way more robust among architectural programs.
Do either of you pay attention to other architectural programs? Do you see any schools doing a really especially good job training architects to do their work?
Well, I can say that
I
we're
don't think right now we're paying much attention, right?
not much attention, but we do have our one of our newer team members came from a design build studio called Rural Studio in Alabama, and maybe it's just the person, but he's picking things up really quickly. And I think that his experience of being in the field, I don't think that can be replaced with years of academic work. I think that a little time in the field is worth years sitting at a desk and learning.
What do you think, Lindsay Schack? Is it the individual or is it the school?
I think it's I don't think the school is a big impact. It's the experience. Students are always super hungry to have an actual client experience. For example, it's not just the building experience. It's designing for a real client, getting to develop a relationship with them, understand their needs, make decisions based upon those needs. And you don't get that opportunity if you're in Fantasyland every semester in your studio project, where even gravity is sort of debatable, and there's no budget and there's no schedule, and you can do something that's beautiful and sculptural and inspiring and great, but it's not real. And there's a place in design school for that. Like, we need a space where we can just go for it from a design sense and go as out there or as creative as we can be, so that you can understand where you can stretch. But that doesn't actually serve the industry of architecture and building that well. That's a personal pursuit, and that's what we can do in our own time in our sketchbooks. So I think the schools are getting demand from their students to increase these design build opportunities. And then I think that for certain individuals, they're drawn to that because they want to be more effective as architects. And I think if you pay attention, you understand that some of the most effective architects are the ones that understand building construction and building science. They're not just sculptors of architectural materials.
So the areas where you both work has been booming for a couple decades, as I understand it. Is there a shortage of tradespeople and contractors like there is in much of the country? I can imagine there's appeal in living in these beautiful places, but we just haven't done a very good job of uh, preparing people for trade work. Do you see that in your work, that there's not enough folks out there?
Absolutely. Um, and I would say it's been exasperated the past couple of years. Um,
Because of the pandemic, it's been more apparent.
yes, I think just because
Mhm.
so many more people are moving here at a more rapid pace, that's across our region. Um, the way that we operate has really had to change to flow with that. Um, and it's a shortage of people, I think, who are interested in the trades. I don't know if people who are just going out to start a career, I don't know if they understand the financial opportunities within the trades. I don't think that that's very well conveyed, but yeah, there's the shortage of housing, I think, is dramatically leading to the shortage of people who want to work in the trades, or honestly in any
You mean that they can't
anything.
find a place to live, so tradespeople can't, live in Bozeman, so there aren't any. Am I understanding that correct? Yeah.
Yes, I would say it's more so a little bit
Mhm.
tightened in the Jackson and Teton Valley markets. Bozeman has a little more space and a little bit better housing situation, but it's not great there either.
That's something I had never thought about, is that if you can't provide housing for folks of normal income, they're not going to be there. It's right. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of the trades
Mhm.
folks who work in this area are driving from Idaho Falls or Rexburg or even 2 hours away in Pocatello daily.
And when you can get a good paying job at some other entity, right, it would be very attractive if you didn't have to drive 2 hours to work every day, I'm guessing.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lindsay Schack at the Pro Talk Live event where we met, you told me that you don't deal with builders who you describe as yellers. Their go-to strategy is to get mad and yell at people. Uh, can you talk about that? Any memorable experiences that you had to put someone and have them walk back from the edge a little bit?
Oh, oh yeah. Like, I mean, from when I was a framer on a job site and just sort of being a fly on the wall and just seeing how everyone communicated with each other, and then wondering like, how am I going to command any respect on this job site? And I realized that part of it was knowing what I'm talking about when I show up. That's job number one. But then, realizing that part of construction is solving problems. Part of design is solving problems. And I realized that there are, and I don't know if it's a thing out here in the West, and maybe it's Wild West stuff, but we have a fair amount of individuals in the building industry that are hot-headed or just, they're under pressure. It's a stressful job. And so, if the way that we deal with stress is that we have a temper tantrum on the site and we throw tools or we zoom off down the road, like it's just like, why did we get out of bed today if that's how we're going to operate? So we have I think Lindsay and I both have a bit of a calm approach to these situations. Um, and we screen our contractors to be able to be professional on their job site and in client meetings and in meetings with us. And yeah, we've had experiences with contractors where they get super frustrated and, people pound the table sometimes, people raise their voices. And we're good at de-escalation and getting back on track to what the solution can be. But I definitely take note of the contractors that I work with, male and female, young and old, that can take a challenge and sit with it for a second and then pivot to the solution instead of freaking out that we're having a challenge and wanting to point fingers about it. I think that takes a lot of energy out of what we're trying to do, and it's not productive, and it makes everyone feel crappy. And we do want to have fun on the job site. We want to have fun with our clients. We want them to have a good experience. Doesn't mean that everything's going to be perfect, but when we have a challenge to solve, we all want to be on the same side of the table and not pointing fingers at each other. I have like no patience for the CYA activity of just pointing fingers and trying to blame somebody for something that didn't go wrong. It means that we have to take responsibility too. It means that we have to say when, something didn't work out the way that we planned. And I think once we can show up with some humility and like some willingness to compromise, then contractors realize that they can do it too.
Lindsay Love, I've heard more than once from uh, architects who work in the high performance home arena that you need the right team to build one of these projects. Who should be on the team, and what do they bring to the table in your estimation?
The more the merrier,
Uh-huh.
to a certain extent. Um, I guess the typical term for this is like an integrative design process. We absolutely employ that from the beginning. Um, and sometimes it feels a little bit challenging to like navigate how to use everybody's time wisely. But um, we love collaborating with the landscape architect and the interior designer and the contractor and the clients. We're all part of this ultimate project as a team from the very beginning, ideally.
Who do you think is often left out that should be part of the discussion for a high performance home build?
Hmm. Well, around here, it's
Mechanical contractor.
particularly challenging.
Mhm.
I was going to say it's particularly challenging to involve a mechanical, either engineer or subcontractor. Um, we don't try to leave them out. It's just really hard to get them involved right now because there are so few of them available.
Interesting.
And the mechanical system is crucial, to be sized rightly for a high performance home. Um, and yeah, sized rightly and choose the right type of system. Choosing the right type of system is also really important. And when there's so few people who know how to do it and really understand high performance, it's really hard.
What do you think, Lindsay Schack? Is there anyone at the table you'd want there that's typically left out?
You know, the contractor is first and foremost, I think, the most important part of the team when it comes to getting it built. And that contractor also then taking on the role of educating their own subcontractors and other team members. And that's why we really encourage our contractors to go out and get builder training that is specific to the types of homes that we do. Um, and you know, the contractor has a relationship with the client to build what the client desires, not what the architect desires. And so the between the trifecta there of the owner, the architect, and the contractor, if everybody agrees on what the goal is, then we can all move together as a team toward the goal. And so for us, it's sort of it happens in a sequence where if the owner is the one who's motivated to say, yes, we are going to push, say, the performance standard of this build to wherever it's defined, and then the contractor can sign up and say, yes, I can achieve that goal. I can help you meet it. And then we can actually have that good, strong relationship where we can get to that outcome that everybody wants, that's equalized and everyone understands the same way. If you don't have that kind of balance and somebody is kind of unsure, and if you know if the owner is not getting the proper information from the architect to have confidence in the outcome, the owner can't really be as directive. And if the contractor can't either bring their own knowledge or get the training in order to be able to fulfill the need, then that's usually where we start saying, well, let's just do it a different way, or let's use a different material, or I know a better way to do this. And we found early on that with the contractor having a similar level of education that Lindsay Love and I have, that the questions that they brought up were more about how to achieve the goal and not so much about debating whether or not there should be a goal. And we spent a lot of time in the early days of our practice having that debate with contractors of where the goal should be. And we understood after a couple of these experiences that maybe what we needed to do was work with a contractor who already understood how to get to the goal. And then it wouldn't be so daunting. It wouldn't be so mysterious and unknown. And then we could just say, yes, let's just go execute. Let's go do this together. And that's what we've been doing for the last few years.
Wow, that is good stuff. It has been a pleasure talking to you both. Is there anything you'd like to tell or ask our audience before we go? Lindsay, Love, you go first.
Um, I would say I want to kind of build on what Lindsay Schack was just touching on. And I think there's two things. One is that when there is definitely a gap between architects education and trades education, and the more we can do to fill that gap, architects learning more about building and building professionals learning more about um, newer methods and
Design.
building science. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that will go a long way towards more sustainable and resilient building building market and stock. And the second thing I would just say is, like, for anybody who's interested in maybe thinking about getting into the trades, like, we need you, and you can make a lot of money doing it.
I feel like we should put the stake in the ground right there. Lindsay Schack, what were you going to say? What would you like our audience to know before we go?
I think as architects, we just want our, the community of people who might hire us someday, or our peers that are working alongside us, to have a value for building performance and to really think about it. And it's a right size for each project. But to have the wonderful opportunity to build a building and to design a custom building even is just a fantastic opportunity. And to not take the chance to try to optimize the systems and be very responsible with your resources seems like a missed opportunity to me. And so I would encourage my colleagues, my future clients, my existing clients to all consider the property, like the awareness of building science in their architect, their chosen design team, and have some faith that those architects could bring them a better home if they gave them an opportunity to do so. I'm always as curious as Lindsay and I are about building science. We sometimes are a little stymied by feeling kind of alone in that space in the Rocky Mountain West. There's a lot of very successful people that we're operating around, and they're doing fantastic work, and it's beautiful work. But I'm always curious as to how it's operating, and I think that um, we want the tent to be as large as possible for the designers, architects, contractors that are willing to participate in a high performance project, and then to be humble enough to ask what that means, right? To be willing to learn, to be open enough to learn new things, and to realize that it's constantly changing and adapting. We're never going to really stop learning in this space, and that's part of what makes it so interesting. But architects have maybe a reputation of sort of saying, hey, I've got all the answers. And I think we're the opposite of that. Like, that's the kind of architects we are. We're like, well, like, let's make sure we're asking the right questions, and then let's go find the answers. And dropping the ego around those things has, I think, really allowed us to take on some of these challenges and solve them in a way where we weren't prevented by our egos from finding those answers. So I would love our audience to consider that when they're thinking about an architect, thinking about a custom design. It's a tremendous opportunity, and to only be considering the aesthetics of it, and not considering the impacts of how it feels when you're inside the space, I think is a missed opportunity. So I encourage people to think about that.
Lindsay Love, what's the website of your firm so folks can learn more about your practice and hopefully get in touch with you to have a project checked out?
Our website is loveshack.com, and you do have to be, or is it loveshackarchitecture.com?
You have the right one.
Okay. Oh my goch.
Yeah, loveshackarchitecture.com.
Loveshackarchitecture.com. And you have to be careful about how you spell shack. It's SCHACK. And if you don't spell it right, you will go somewhere you were really not expecting.
You'll be surprised at work.
Yeah. Yep.
It's been a pleasure talking to you both. Thank you so much for being here. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I always have to laugh about I'm when I'm correcting people on how to spell my name, and it probably comes off as like really bossy, but honestly, it's about trying to prevent them from never being able to contact us again. If they don't know how to spell my last name, they won't find us, and they might get sent to a place on the internet that doesn't represent us at all. So I just laugh about that because something that we have to do, and we're lucky with the fun business name that we have. It brings a lot of smiles from our clients, and they seem to remember us. So we're fortunate in that, but having to redirect people to the right website is something we make sure that we do.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Lindsay and Lindsay for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, review us. However you're listening, it helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Happy building.